ESPN projects Penn State and Utah to meet in the national semifinal next season. Crazy, right? Not as crazy as you might think it is.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
I'm Seyko of Locked On Nittany Lions. He is JT Wistrcill of Locked On Utes, and we are teaming up for a Locked On crossover as our teams meet again, JT. This time, instead of the Rose Bowl, it'll be at the national semifinal. So this is a Locked On crossover. Thank you so much for making us your first listen and watch today. JT, you're going to have to kind of cue me in on all of this because I don't think Penn State being in the semifinal is actually, I think Penn State should be one of the favorites for the national championship next season. So this kind of fits in with what I'm thinking right now as we sit, going into February and everything. But from Utah's point of view, it seems a little outlandish to me, but maybe you can correct me where I'm wrong here.
Look, it's definitely a little outlandish, and I got to be honest. Okay. Utah is not currently my pick to win the Big 12 in 2025. But I absolutely believe this team has the pieces to win this conference this coming season. When you're looking at this Utah team, they ended up losing 5 of their last 7 games. But what was the reason they lost? Excuse me, not 5 of their last 7. They lost 7 of their final 8 games on the season. So a really dreadful close to the year. But why did they lose so many of those conference games? Bad quarterback play. So what did they go out to do? They got Devin Dampier, who was at New Mexico last year, was one of the top dual threat quarterbacks in all of college football. And he got his offensive coordinator too. So they're both going to be coming up together. 4th best offense in the country. Dampier, over 1,000 yards rushing, over 2,500 yards throwing. The only player in college football to have those marks. So is he going to be a great quarterback? Probably not. But he should be a good and more than serviceable starter. And if Utah had good to just better than bad quarterback play, they would have won several of those games. So I absolutely believe that with Dampier being in at quarterback, this team is going to cause problems. His legs in particular. I mean, we see this so often in college football, right? Whether it was Riley Leonard for Notre Dame or so many other, Drew Aller can do it a little bit too, right? So many times the defense will have you dead to rights, and then the quarterback, what do? They make a play with their legs.
They ad-lib.
Yeah, they ad-lib, exactly. And that is 1,000% what Dampier can do. The Utah defense is always really good, so I think they'll live up to their end of the bargain. Can Dampier do it and help this team win the Big 12? I think they absolutely can. Definitely a little crazy to be sitting here right now saying that they will, but I think Bill Connelly's logic in this ESPN article does make a lot of sense if you dive into why, and we'll continue to talk about that too. But yeah, Utah is definitely the one who has to, this would be more of the shocker for Utah than Penn State, absolutely, with the talent that Nittany Lions return.
Yeah, and to speak on quarterback play, right? Everybody wants to dunk on Drew Aller because he didn't have, he had a bad national semifinal against Notre Dame. That was, I know what Ohio State did, putting up 30 plus points against them, but that was still a good Notre Dame defense. And Penn State still scored 24, so it's not like that was abysmal. But if Drew Aller makes, I say, at least one more play, they are in the national championship against an Ohio State team that they already played the first time and kept it, relatively close. They were right on the doorstep. So I think Penn State takes the step forward. I think they are a national championship contender, not somebody that's a fringe 10-2 team. That definitely, they beat expectations last season, but they still struggled in the big game. But this is a team that is just they're getting stronger by the fact that they're bringing everybody back. Drew Aller is going to get better. And I know everybody's going to say that's a crazy take, but it's not, because it's the natural progression of talented college football players. All right, let's have an honest conversation here. Drew Aller is going to get better as a 4th-year college football player, 3rd consecutive year starting, 2nd year in the same offense with Andy Kotelnicki, who helped him take that step forward initially. Oh, and then you get 2 co-starters back at running back who will now go into their 4th consecutive year of starting. You get 4 starting offensive linemen back, and then you poach the best defensive coordinator in football from the defending national champion, Ohio State. So if Penn State wasn't keen on going all in, if this wasn't a national title contender, then they wouldn't have fought to keep key players around, because those guys could have gone, Aller could have gone off to the NFL, Singleton, Allen at running back, definitely some offensive linemen too. Oh, and then the defensive side of it to go along with Jim Knowles. Deni Dennis Sutton is back. He could have been probably a 3rd-round pick if he tested well at the Combine Pro Day. Who knows, maybe even a 2nd-round pick. Zane Duran is back as well. Zach Key-Wheatley in the back end of the defense. They go and get back King Mack, who was there at Penn State, transferred out to Alabama. Now he's back in. So Jim Knowles coming in, being able to take a Tom Allen defense that was top 10 to 15 conservatively, top 10 to 15, but this is a Jim Knowles now he can architect this defense. He can build this defense to be top 5, and that's what you need. You need an elite ground game and an elite defense if you want to have a chance in a national title run, a competent, capable quarterback in Drew Aller, and that's the formula for at least getting to the national title. They would be in this ESPN article from Bill Connolly. He does have Penn State winning the Big Ten, being the Big Ten champion, and beating Georgia in the national championship as well. So, sorry, JT, we knock out your team here on from the Penn State side of it and ultimately win the 2026 title.
Good deal.
I do think it's because quarterback play is key, as you mentioned here. So Isaac Wilson was not the answer. Cam Rising but he just couldn't stay on the football field, man. So I think Utah's problem isn't quarterback play itself, but just getting a reliable quarterback to stay on the field.
Yeah, I mean, Devin Dampier is a guy that by himself, you don't look at Devin Dampier and go, oh my gosh, he makes Utah 6 wins better just because of how good he is. No, it's the difference between bad quarterback play, as we talked about earlier, to good quarterback play. And I do think Devin Dampier is ready to make that leap. Now, he did throw 12 interceptions last year against Mountain West defenses, but closed the year's final 3 games, didn't throw an interception, beat a ranked Washington State team, performed very well against Auburn and Arizona when facing them last year too. Utah returns one of the best tackle duos in college football, so I'm really excited to see what those guys can do up front. Honestly, everyone's back up front. I think you might need to replace a piece or two in the interior offensive line, even with those returners, but grabbed a couple okay receivers in the transfer portal. That's one thing we know. Penn State, Utah are going to be facing off. The wide receiver play ain't probably going to be lighting the world on fire in this matchup. But you look at this defense too. Morgan Scalley is an incredible defensive coordinator. He's done a great job in the past. I mean, that game, we look back on the Rose Bowl, right? Like you guys remember facing off against Morgan Scalley. He did a good job against Penn State. You guys had, what was it, 14-7 at the half? It was 14-14, right?
Yeah, it was close.
Yeah.
It was close. And what happened was Cam Rising got knocked out of the game, and then quarterback play couldn't keep up with what Manny Diaz was throwing at them defensively at the time.
Yeah, and I've said before too, I do believe if you look at that game, Penn State still probably goes on to win it, even if Cam Rising was playing. But Utah's still right there. I mean, Cam Rising was keeping him in the game, and he was playing really well. Once he got hurt, things fell off for Utah. But this is a proud Utah team with a great tradition and culture. Kyle Whittingham, yes, last year was a step back, but you make massive changes on the offensive side of the ball to hopefully get you back. There's tons of returning defensive starters still. So I'm very optimistic about what this Utah team can do. One point I love that Bill Connolly makes in the article is how bad Utah was in one-score games. So often when a team performs poorly in one-score games, that usually flips one season to the next. That's why he's not as high on a BYU or an Arizona State. Like the obvious teams were like, why aren't they right there? Well, they had some of these close games that they were able to squeak out. Just history has proven over time that usually doesn't always replicate itself. And BYU's lost some key guys too. ASU, I know Levitt's back. They lost their heartbeat in Cam Scadaboo, so that's a massive loss for them. There is lots of reason to see why Utah can win the Big 12. It's an unlikely pick, but I believe they can. Zach, going back to your Penn State thing, I will say I am still a little nervous for the Nittany Lions to live up to those lofty expectations. They are no doubt one of the favorites. You mentioned they bring most of the guys back, but Abdul Carter might be the best player in this draft. Tyler Warren is one of the best pass catchers in this draft and was obviously Penn State's everything in the passing game outside of when they did use those 2 running backs there. So, I mean, do you feel like you guys have done enough in the transfer portal to replace that to meet the lofty expectations, losing 2 of the 15 best players still in college football with all the talent you return?
I think it helps when you get those 2 running backs back. Again,
True.
You can't find me a team in the past decade, 2 decades, 3 decades where you are returning 2 co-starters at running back and 4 starters at offensive line, but particularly those 2 running backs.
Yeah.
Rarely, and especially in this age of NIL and the transfer portal and the allure of the NFL, because they were ranked as the 5th and 6th best running backs in this draft respectively, and they're coming back for their senior seasons, and they will be 4th-year starters, both of them. They are co-starters. So let's talk about that, because JT, you bring up some concerns about this Penn State team. There's definitely concerns about this Utah team, because while Penn State has the due respect, I don't think Utah has enough of it to get to that semifinal. And then can Penn State actually win the 2026 national title? We'll tell you about it more after a word from our sponsors.
Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by Wayfair. After the holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your home a little TLC. I always find that decluttering and refreshing my space helps me get back into a routine. Whether you're tidying up, cleaning out, or just want to give your space a new look to start the year, Wayfair is everything you need, all within your budget. I'm currently looking for furniture, and their huge selection makes it easy to find pieces that fit my style and budget. My favorite part, the free and hassle-free delivery, even for large items. Wayfair sites are so easy to navigate, and I found everything I need in no time. There's something for every style in every home, no matter your space or budget. Wayfair makes it easy to tackle your New Year's goals. If you're still able to keep them going, that's why you need to head over to Wayfair, because they have endless inspiration for your space. And Wayfair is always going to be able to help you out in a time crunch, the delivery fee, fast, hassle-free. Wayfair has your back. Give your home the refresh it needs with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. You can check out Wayfair today.
So, JT, I think you bring up some pretty good points about Penn State is losing Tyler Warren. Penn State is losing Abdul Carter, and some people that are going to be forgotten in the fold. KJ Winston didn't play, but he certainly would have helped if he played the full season. He's going off to the NFL. You have to replace one of those high-end caliber safeties. Oh, Jalen Reed too. But I think it's the combination of Penn State is pretty sound offensively with what it can rely on. I mean, Penn State already ran the ball 600 times, over 600 times last season. They can do the same thing again. With Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen back. JT, this might sound crazy, but I fully expect this Penn State team to run a base like wishbone offense. You have the running back depth to do it. You have the offensive line to do it. And yes, they're losing Tyler Warren, but they have a 5-star tight end, a former 5-star recruit waiting in the wings named Luke Reynolds. Khalil Dinkins is a veteran. They're going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets. They're going to run a lot of 3 running back sets. So when you say, well, a lot of people are saying this, that Penn State needs an elite pass catcher. They don't have an elite wide receiver. They don't have a wide receiver 1. My full confidence is in Kyron Hudson to be a serviceable addition from USC. Do I think he is going to be this insanely talented player that is going to be at the top of every Big Ten statistic when it comes to receiving?
He's not Jeremiah Smith.
Absolutely, yeah. Jeremiah Smith is going to take care of that, and they're still fending people off for Carnell Tate.
Yeah.
But do I think Kyron Hudson, by proxy, is going to benefit from a Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen 1-2 punch, Luke Reynolds emerging as a breakout player, Khalil Dinkins being capable in the offense as well? Penn State's just going to have a lot of different, it's going to be more so about quantity as opposed to quality.
No, and you're right there. I am curious to see, you mentioned the 5-star, and we've both dealt with this, right? 5-star and just elite recruits not living up to the hype. So it definitely helps to have that when replacing Tyler Warren. But as you know better than me, replacing him will be easier said than done. So I am curious to see how you do that. But there is no question that Penn State has to be one of the top 5 teams in college football. Honestly, I think you can't have them outside the top 3 just with the talent they have coming back. I like them. I mean, Zach, what is Drew Aller next year in terms of do you think he's the best returning quarterback in college football?
I mean, I would say so.
I know some Texas fan going to come in here and try to muscle his way in about Arch Manning, even though we haven't seen Arch Manning consistently in big games.
And that's the difference, right? Yeah. Drew Aller is coming back for his 4th year of college football, 3rd consecutive year starting, 2nd year within the same offense with the offensive coordinator that began to tap into his potential. No other team can say that. I think the closest you get is a Garrett Nussmeier at LSU, DJ Lagway at Florida, but Lagway, I'm talking about consistent. And I know Drew Aller has run into a lot of speed bumps along the way, but he's still a good quarterback with all the potential in the world. Is he terrible? Absolutely not. Has he made his mistakes? Has he struggled at times? Yes. But I feel like people watch one game against Notre Dame and it's an automatic declaration. You can condemn his career. He has no chance, no shot. And I believe that all of these players will take another step forward. A Nico Imaliava at Tennessee is going to take a step forward. Arch Manning still has to settle in. And that's speaking to something as well in Penn State. They're going up against Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan, who all have new quarterbacks that are, and frankly, in Ohio State's case, might have 2 new coordinators. Like Penn State was able to knock them off by going and taking away Jim Knowles. Chip Kelly might be leaving for the NFL. We'll see at the time of this conversation. Speaking of coordinators, JT, I know that Utah's gone through some coordinator changes. So how do they settle in? Because like I said, this matchup is going to seem outlandish to a lot of people outside of our circles.
Almost outlandish, as a couple of years ago telling someone, Ohio State's going to win the national championship, and then their defensive coordinator is going to leave for a team they beat earlier in the regular season.
Well, they should have showed him the due respect, because everything I've gathered is they didn't do anything to fight to keep him. So that's on them.
No, you're right. I was just saying how, could you imagine telling someone that 5 years ago? That's just how much college football has changed, where you see a team that wins it all leaving for not even what you could say a lateral move, but just because, like you said, with the respect. And I saw his introduction to him talking to the team, how much it means to him coming back to Penn State and just growing up and everything. That's a crazy story, but it's just wild. That's the world we live in. Utah still is Morgan Scala DC. We covered him. Jason Beck. Jason Beck is the guy, that fourth best offense I talked about. But the question is going to be, is Kyle Whittingham going to let Jason Beck run his offense? Because Kyle Whittingham has a history of, we're not throwing the ball. We need to, unless he really feels confident in quarterback, but we're going to be a run first team. And I mean, with Dampier, 1,000 yards rushing, like we mentioned, Wayshawn Parker, you get from Washington State, that's 1,000 yard, or actually 700 yard back from, but guy who has potential to be 1,000 yard guy too. So I do think there's a lot of reason to think this offense can be really good. They averaged 33 last year with the Lobos, going to be facing tougher defenses in the Big 12. Obviously, it's a step up in competition, but Dampier has the skill set. I think he is a clear breakout guy, just someone who's ready to make this leap. So I absolutely think he's ready for this. I think he can win. I think he could win a lot of awards. If you're talking for a dark horse, outside the main name Heisman contenders, Dampier fits the profile that quarterbacks have in the past who have came out of nowhere. I'm not saying he's going to be there, but if you're telling me he's there are way crazier things that have happened when you look at how he's ascending. This is only going to be his third year of college football too, so he's still growing, still getting better. There's a lot to like about this Utah team, including just the down year they had last year. And usually you see a team like that bounce back. Also, the final thing I'll say on just how crazy it would be if Utah did this. Another thing that was pretty crazy, Arizona State was picked to finish dead last in this conference, Zach, and they nearly knocked off Texas. So Utah, it's crazy that they could get here, but even the team against Penn State, I think Utah, if you look at Dampier, you look at the history of what Utah's done in the trenches, there's no way they're going to be favored against Penn State. Utah can compete with the Nittany Lions, and there's a world if they got to this game, I do believe they could upset them. It would be a massive upset, but I'm not ruling it out. Just like at this time last year, no one would have said that ASU team was going to nearly beat Texas, and they were a 4th and 13 and that crazy targeting call away from doing it too.
Yeah, very true. I mean, and upset is a strong word because Utah would be the 3 seed in this case, and Penn State would be the 2 seed based on what the ESPN projections are saying here. I think Penn State can certainly live up to that. Now, of course, I've been called out for this, that, hey, am I by saying what I'm saying, because I think this is national championship or a bust for Penn State. And why I say that is because you don't go make a play for the best coordinator in college football, best defensive coordinator anyway, and take him away from the team that's been a thorn in your side for the past part of a decade. You don't try to retain a quarterback that could have gone off to the NFL, 2 running backs that could have gone off to the NFL, right? This wasn't a fringe decision. Drew Aller would have been a first-round pick in 2025 on potential alone. And the reason he didn't go in is because he wasn't guaranteed to be a top 5 pick. Okay, that's not being disrespectful. He still would have been a first-round draft pick by somebody. Somebody said, hey, we'll let him sit, learn. But Aller passed up on a first-round selection. Singleton and Allen were number 5 and number 6, according to ESPN's Mel Kiper. Whatever you think about Mel Kiper, fine. But they came back. They could have started their NFL careers, gotten NFL money as well, and Penn State made a push and got competitive with its NIL to retain its best players. Tyler Warren, Abdul Carter, there's nothing you can do. Unless you want to offer them millions and millions of dollars, that would be ludicrous in itself, but there's nothing that they could do for their draft stock. At least there's this kind of complementary balance where you say, hey, we can pay you some NIL money while you go and you can solidify your draft status. Let's put it that way. My overall concerns about Penn State are they still need to build the depth out. Jim Knowles, I don't think there's actually going to be too much of an adjustment period. Do I think Jim Knowles' system is one of the most complicated in college football? Absolutely. But Penn State has been running the 4-2-5 for the better part of 3 seasons now. They wanted Jim Knowles all along since 2022. Nothing has really changed on that front. It's just now the face of the defense, and that's Jim Knowles instead of a Manny Diaz, a Tom Allen. But Penn State, the building blocks are there, so they don't have to reinvent the wheel in this case. But if they get injured at position groups like a wide receiver, because Kyron Hudson, Devontae Ross, that's really all they have right now. If we get to the spring transfer portal window and they add some more guys, great. But I think past those, that's the thing. If you expect Kyron Hudson to play 13, 14, 15 games, that's all well and good, but it's football. We know that players get hurt, as we saw with Cam Rising, because Utah was favored to win the Big 12 last season and did not because of the injuries they dealt with. Yep,
Utah's season, last 2 years in a row, they've had sky-high expectations, and they've been completely derailed by injuries, particularly to the quarterback spot. They've made moves to try and upgrade. They actually brought Isaac Wilson back, although I don't know if he's even going to be QB2, maybe even QB4 all the way down there, just with how bad he was last year, just keeping it real.
Interesting.
But yeah, I mean, it was bad. I mean, it was simply put just bad. So often, if you were to break down the play, and I've said this so many times before on my show, because I do not like piling on Isaac Wilson, but if we're just evaluating football, you just go, quarterback's got to make the play there. That's that reason that play failed is quarterback. PFF, and I don't love everything PFF does, but I think they do a lot of good things. Like a lot of Utah's wide receivers were very highly graded there. The running backs were very highly graded, and then it's so often
so
like,
it was the quarterback.
We see the quarterback. So that's where so much of this is going to fall on Devin Dampier. How quickly can Jason Beck adjust in the new system? Utah has tons of questions. I mean, Devin Dampier making the jump up, right? Can you have enough? You talk about your guys' struggles at receiver. I hinted at it earlier. Like there are players with potential, but no one with a star. They're trying to get their wide receiver one back for eligibility, just because Diego Pavia won, he's got a chance. He's not a JUCO guy, but a weird fifth-year thing. So there's a lot for Utah. They got to replace a lot on the defensive line. They lost one of their top D linemen to BYU. Like, this is how crazy the world that is the transfer portal can be right now. But it's going to be a challenge for Utah to do it. But once again, I feel so much better about this Utah team right now than I did about Arizona State's team last year. And ASU was able to win it all. They got the coach in place. They have potential at the quarterback. Utah is capable of making a run. Zach, last thing I want to say real quick, because you mentioned this earlier, some fans, just people in college football having opinions on Drew Aller. Be a Utah fan, watch what Utah dealt with at quarterback the last 2 years, and you will think Drew Aller is the greatest thing ever. I can promise you that. Anyone who has questions about how good Drew Aller is.
Well, let's look across the conference, because part of the reason that Penn State and Utah get to this point as projected by ESPN is because they win their respective conferences. So how does the Big 10 look? How does the Big 12 look? We'll tell you more about it on the other side of this break.
All right, Zach, looking at the conference landscape for the Big 12 and the Big 10, I mean, that's what we're talking about. Each of these teams trying to be one of the last teams, Utah would be the last team standing in the Big 12, the only team to make it more than likely, and Penn State trying to be the last team standing in the Big 10. So talking about how the landscape would shake out in both these conferences, I think the Big 12 has the best parity of any conference in college football. That's why. I think it's awesome. I mean, that's where it really is fun. Like, as frustrating as last year was for a Utah fan, I can respect and love the story of Arizona State so much.
The script was completely flipped upside down.
It was, yeah, and because Utah was dang close to the bottom, so it really was just about exactly flipped upside down. So you're looking at the Big 12 this coming year. I mean, Arizona State's going to be towards the top of your favorites. I know ESPN has picked Utah to go this far. The Vegas odds have Utah and Kansas State, which I think is more just a respect to those programs. Because if you look over the past 5 years, Utah and Kansas State have been the best programs in the Big 12 based on overall consistency, but neither one had a great year last year. Iowa State gets Rocco Beck back, but they just got shredded in the championship game by Arizona State. So, and they're going to lose a couple players too. Can the Cyclones do it again? Sam Levitt back. We already mentioned no Cam Scadaboo for Arizona State. BYU gets Jake Retzloff back, but they lose some key guys. The Buffs, I mean, Shador and Travis gone. I think Coach Prime Dion is doing some good things there, but that's a lot to replace. Baylor won their final 6 games, but we weren't that far removed from Dave Aranda on the hot seat. Texas Tech spent all this money to upgrade their roster, make it this NIL juggernaut. Just ask Ole Miss how that ended up going for them getting into the college football playoff. Kansas had all these preseason expectations. They sucked the first few games. Then they become the Giant Slayers. They end up beating Iowa State, BYU, and Colorado late. So can they keep up the consistency? And I already mentioned Kansas State too, just being a consistent team in this conference. They got some dudes as well. Come back, Avery Johnson being a key one. So the Big 12 is still extremely open. BYU's win total coming into last year was under 4.5. They soared past that and proved to me they were the second best team in this conference. They lost out on a tiebreaker to Iowa State to go to the Big 12 championship game. So as we sit here right now, I'd probably say Arizona State would be who I would consider the favorite. But because, I just gave you every reason about why all these teams could be awesome or why they couldn't be. This conference is as open as it sounds. But Zach, how about you guys for the Big 10? You mentioned Ohio State's going to step back. Oregon should probably step back.
Well, you would think so, right? Because there is the spring transfer portal window, and because those teams are so financially competitive. And I'm not trying to allude to, if the shoe fits, right? for the way that I'm not trying to change anybody's mind, but let's not pretend like Ohio State doesn't have a lot of money to work with. Oregon doesn't have a lot of money to work with. How they use that money, okay, fine. That is up to your interpretation, but they are going to use those funds to build out at positions that they feel like they need to. If that's quarterback, right? Is that getting some other complementary players? We've seen Ohio State already be aggressive and go and get a replacement tight end. Max Clare, I was just overshadowed at Purdue. That's one of the best Big Ten. That was one of the best tight ends in Big Ten football last season, but you wouldn't know it because he played at Purdue. So it's the fact that when you compare them, Drew Aller, fourth-year college quarterback, third year starting with the same program, with the same offensive coordinator going into the second year. I look at Julian Sayin as a completely brand new player at this point in time. You don't know if you're going to have Chip Kelly. Oregon at least has the consistency with coaching and coordinators and everything. Will Stein returns, but Dante Moore, is he the answer? Why were there were question marks if Oregon was going to go into the portal? Were they making a play for Carson Beck? Does that mean they're not as confident if they're, rumored and linked to other quarterback player or other quarterbacks? What happens when the spring transfer portal runs around? Chemistry matters. Consistency matters, especially in this day and age in college football. And Penn State has that above all else. And most importantly, you have the veterans returning at key positions: quarterback, running back, offensive line. You can win a title that way. You don't need a superstar wide receiver. It would be nice, and I'm not saying Penn State shouldn't try to do that in the transfer portal window, but when I look at the rest of the Big Ten, I'll tell you who one of the biggest threats is that's going to fly under the radar for the most part right now. The setup that I'm talking about, the foundation that I applaud Penn State for having, Illinois has that. Actually, Illinois, Brett Bielema.
Well, he'll tell you about it. He's not being shot on social media right now.
Exactly, because he probably feels really confident with where the program stands, and I can talk my talk because I know that we're going to be a threat because people aren't giving us enough credit. So if I'm being honest, yes, Oregon and Ohio State, just because they're unpredictable. We never know that they could make a splash. They could make a splash in the transfer portal that we have no idea is coming. But for the teams that have it right now, Penn State and honestly Illinois at the top of the conference with the most certainty at this point.
Which is crazy to think, but you're right. I mean, with Illinois, the season they had, and I got so sick and tired of hearing about how great all these teams in the SEC were, and they're like, Illinois is not as good. And then what does Illinois do? They go and beat South Carolina, who everyone was telling me had to be in. They were so good. And I know bowl games are a little different.
Illinois had a better case to be in this 12-team playoff than all those other fringe, Alabama, South Carolina, any of them. Illinois should have been that 12th team based on ratings and rankings and
who were their
analytics.
losses to? Oregon and who else?
Penn State.
And Penn State. So yeah, and then I thought they had
Ohio State. I think it was Ohio State too.
Was it Ohio State? So yeah, so literally you just lose to juggernauts. The same thing for everyone was talking about how awful Indiana was, and then Indiana's only 2 losses are to the 2 teams that met in the national championship game. So it's always so crazy to see how this stuff always shakes out. But one thing's for sure, even though we're far away from another college football season, the race for these title games is going to be incredibly exciting, and we are definitely going to continue to talk about our teams every day, whether that's Locked On Utes or Locked On Nittany Lions. And Zach, fingers crossed that we actually get to see each other in this semifinal game, because I know for Utah, hey, even if we lose, I mean, we'd be popping bottles just to be there versus, you guys got loftier goals, of course. But either way, being in the Final Four is something for you guys. Do it again. I would just love to do it for the first time.
ESPN says it's going to be in the Fiesta Bowl, so we'll see how it all plays out. But the transfer portal window is certainly going to be important. Summer workouts, making sure players stay healthy, because so much can change from the end of January going into February all the way into August and September. So that's going to do it for this Locked On crossover between Locked On Nittany Lions and Locked On Utes. JT, it's great to chat with you. So anytime we get an excuse to talk about our respective teams and how they could play one another, I'm all for it. So make sure, if you're not already, subscribe to both of the YouTube channels and wherever you get your podcasts. Let us know your thoughts down in the comments section if this is realistic or not. Penn State versus Utah in the Fiesta Bowl for the 2026 12-team playoff. JT, it was great talking with you again, and thanks so much for the time.
You're the man, Zach. Always appreciate you. Keep crushing it.